She was scrubbing floors at the Pendleton auction house on Bond Street when Victoria St. Clair kicked a bucket of dirty water over her shoes. No one looked up. No one cared. To the elite of London, Genevieve Sterling was less than a ghost. She was a stain on their polished marble world. But what Victoria didn't know, and what the entire room was about to find out, in the most humiliating way possible, was that the girl holding the mop wasn't just nobody. She was holding a secret that could dismantle their entire social hierarchy, and when the doors to the Winter Gala finally opened, Genevieve wouldn't be bowing to them. They would be on their knees for her. London in November is unforgiving, but it was nothing compared to the atmosphere inside the Pendleton auction house. It was a place where history was sold to the highest bidder, where a Fabergé egg might sit casually next to a handwritten letter from Napoleon. Genevieve Sterling knew every inch of that building, not because she was the patron, but because she cleaned it. At 24, Genevieve, Jen, to the few people who bothered to speak to her, wore a uniform that was 2 sizes too big. Her hair was always pulled back in a severe, fraying bun, and she kept her eyes fixed on the floor. It was a survival mechanism. In a place like Pendleton, eye contact was seen as an act of aggression if you weren't wearing at least 5 carats of diamonds. Her tormentor-in-chief was Victoria St. Clair. Victoria was the kind of beautiful that felt like a weapon. Tall, blonde, and possessing a laugh that sounded like breaking glass, she was the senior associate of antiquities. More importantly, she was the daughter of Lord Alistair St. Clair, a man who owned half of Mayfair. Victoria didn't just work at Pendleton. She ruled it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before the Gala of the Century, the Pendleton Winter Auction. The star of the show was the Coeur de Lion diamond, a stone not seen in public since the fall of the French monarchy. Jen was polishing the brass railing of the grand staircase when the click-clack of Prada heels echoed through the hall. "You missed a spot," a voice drawled from above. Jen froze. She didn't need to look up to know it was Victoria. She also knew that next to Victoria would be her sycophants, Liam Cavendish and Jessica Thorne. "I'm sorry, Miss St. Clair," Jen murmured, keeping her head down. "I'll get it right away." "You're always sorry, aren't you?" Victoria sighed, descending the stairs. She held a takeaway cup of coffee, something artisan and overpriced. "It's actually depressing to watch. Do you have any ambition? Or is invisible just your career goal?" Liam chuckled. "Careful, Vic. She might cry. We don't want to rust the brass." Jen gripped her polishing cloth tighter. "Just breathe," she told herself. 3 more months. Just 3 more months. She wasn't just cleaning floors. In the evenings, in her cramped studio apartment in Hackney, Jen was decoding 17th century ciphers. She was an expert in European lineage, holding a double doctorate from the Sorbonne under a pseudonym. But here she was nobody. She needed access to the Pendleton archives, specifically the Red Ledger of the House of Auvergne, which was locked in the basement vault. The cleaning job was the only way in. Victoria stopped right in front of her. She tilted her cup, and a stream of lukewarm latte splashed onto Jen's worn-out sneakers. "Oops," Victoria said, her face completely flat. "My hand slipped. Clean that up, would you? And do try to look presentable for the gala set-up tomorrow. We have actual royalty attending. We can't have the help looking like... well, looking like you." Jessica giggled. "Who's coming again, Vic? The Duke of Westminster?" "Bigger," Victoria whispered loudly, stepping over Jen's wet shoes. "Rumour has it a representative from the House of Auvergne is coming to reclaim the diamond. Can you imagine? I bet they're ancient and dusty." Jen's heart stopped. She stayed crouched on the floor, wiping up the coffee, her hands trembling. They weren't coming for the diamond, they were coming for her. That night, the Pendleton auction house was silent, save for the hum of the security systems. Jen clocked out at 9 p.m., but she didn't leave. She slipped into the janitorial closet on the 3rd floor, waiting until the night guards, a jovial pair named Bert and Ernie, a private joke she kept to herself, did their rounds. At 10:15 p.m., she moved. She wasn't wearing her oversized uniform anymore. Underneath, she wore black leggings and a fitted turtleneck. She moved through the shadows of the gallery like smoke. She knew the blind spots of every camera. She had spent 6 months mapping them while buffing the lenses. She reached the basement vault. This was it. The biometric scanner required a retinal scan of a senior director, or a high-resolution photograph of one. Jen pulled a folded piece of glossy photo paper from her pocket. It was a close-up of Arthur Pendleton, the owner, taken from a Forbes magazine spread. It was a gamble. The older scanners were easily tricked by high-contrast irises. She held the photo up to the lens, holding her breath. Beep! Click! The heavy steel door groaned open. Jen slipped inside. The air smelled of old paper and dust, the smell of secrets. She ignored the shelves of gold bullion and rare stamps. She went straight to the back, to a dusty section marked Unverified Assets, 1918 to 1945. There it was. The Red Ledger. Her hands shook as she pulled the leather-bound book from the shelf. This book contained the private transaction records of the House of Auvergne, a royal lineage thought to have been extinguished during the political upheavals of the 20th century. She flipped to the year 1998. There, written in faded ink, transfer of custody. The infant, Sophia Genevieve, entrusted to the Sterling family, London, for protection against the coup of the Black Rose. Tears pricked her eyes. It was real. Her parents, the Sterlings, hadn't just been a quiet couple who died in a car crash when she was 12. They were guardians, royal guards. And she wasn't Genevieve Sterling. She was Princess Sophia Genevieve of Auvergne, the sole heir to a fortune that made the British royals look middle class. But there was something else. A note clipped to the page. The seal of authority is hidden within the frame of the Coeur de Lion. Without the seal, the heir cannot claim the throne. Jen gasped. The Coeur de Lion diamond. The very diamond Victoria St. Clair was auctioning off in 2 days. If that diamond was sold, Jen's birthright, and her only proof of identity, would disappear into a private collection in Dubai or Shanghai forever. Suddenly the lights in the vault flickered on. Jen spun around, shoving the ledger behind her back. Standing in the doorway wasn't a guard. It was Liam Cavendish, Victoria's lackey. He was holding a tablet, looking smug. Well, well, Liam smirked, tapping his screen. I thought I saw a rat on the cameras, but it's just the cleaner. He took a step forward, his eyes dropping to the book behind her back. What do you have there, Jen? Stealing silver? Or is it something more interesting? Jen's mind raced. If she ran, she was guilty. If she stayed, she was caught. I was just cleaning, she stammered, slipping back into a persona. I got locked in. Liam laughed, a cruel barking sound. In the vault? With a biometric lock? Drop the act. Give me the book. He lunged for her. Jen dodged, but she wasn't fast enough. Liam grabbed her wrist, twisting it hard. She cried out, dropping the ledger. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, falling open to the page with her name on it. Liam looked down. He read the entry. He read it again. His face went pale. He looked at Jen, then back at the book. The mockery drained from his face, replaced by a cold, calculating greed. Princess, he whispered. Then a slow smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a predator who just realized the rabbit he caught was actually made of gold. Does Victoria know? He asked softly. No, Jen breathed. Please, you don't understand. Oh, I think I do, Liam said. He picked up the book and closed it. You're the lost heir, and you need the diamond. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. Here's what's going to happen, Your Highness. You're going to put that uniform back on. You're going to scrub the toilets for the gala, and you're going to let me figure out how to sell this information to the highest bidder. You can't, Jen pleaded. Watch me, Liam hissed. If you try to leave, I'll tell everyone you were stealing. I have the video. Who will they believe? The future vice president of Pendleton, or the girl who scrubs the floors?" He shoved the ledger under his arm. "Now get out, before I change my mind and call the police." Jen fled the vault, her heart shattering. She had found the truth, only to lose it in the same heartbeat. But Liam had made a mistake. He thought he had broken her. He didn't realize that royalty isn't about wearing a crown. It's about fighting for your people. And right now, Jen was an army of one. The morning of the gala, the tension in Pendleton House was suffocating. Florists were hauling in thousands of white hydrangeas. Security teams were sweeping for bugs. Jen was invisible again, mopping the main foyer. But her mind was sharp, calculating. She needed to get to that diamond before the auction started at 8 p.m. Victoria was in rare form. She was wearing a red dress that cost more than Jen's entire life earnings. "Liam!" Victoria shouted across the hall. "Where is the inventory list?" Liam walked over, looking tired but smug. He shot a glance at Jen, winking discreetly. He was enjoying this power trip. He hadn't told Victoria yet. He was probably planning to blackmail Jen directly, or perhaps sell the secret to the usurpers of Auvergne. "Right here, Vic," Liam said, handing her a clipboard. "Good. And make sure she," Victoria pointed a manicured finger at Jen, "stays out of sight tonight. If I see her anywhere near the ballroom, she's fired. Immediately." "Understood," Liam said. He walked over to Jen, lowering his voice. "You heard the lady. Basement duty tonight. If you try to come upstairs, I release the footage." Jen nodded, keeping her head down. "Yes, sir." But as Liam walked away, Jen's hand brushed against her pocket. Inside was a small velvet pouch she had retrieved from her apartment that morning. It contained the only heirloom her parents had left her, a signet ring with a crest of a phoenix rising from flames, the crest of Auvergne. She wasn't going to the basement. At 6 p.m., the guests began to arrive. Limousines clogged Bond Street. Paparazzi flashed bulbs like lightning storms. The creme de la creme of European society was here. Jen was in the staff locker room. She stripped off her grey uniform. She didn't have a gown. She didn't have a stylist. But she had ingenuity. She had raided the damaged vintage bin in the costume department earlier that day, items deemed unsellable due to tears or stains. She had found a 1920s black silk Chanel gown with a rip in the hem and a red wine stain on the bodice. With a needle, thread, and a pair of scissors, she had transformed it. She cut the stained bodice away, turning it into a daring, backless halter neck. She hemmed the rip into a high slit. It was sleek, modern, and dangerous. She let her hair down. It cascaded in thick chestnut waves down her back. She applied lipstick she'd bought at a drugstore, a deep blood red. She looked in the cracked mirror of the locker room. The frightened cleaning girl was gone. Staring back was Sophia Genevieve. "Time to crash the party," she whispered. She slipped out the back service exit and circled around the block to the front entrance. The bouncers were checking the guest list on iPads. "Name?" The bouncer grunted, not looking up. "Lady Sophia of Auvergne," Jen said, her voice clear and commanding. It was the first time she had ever spoken her real title aloud. The bouncer paused. He looked up, ready to turn away a gatecrasher. But then he saw her. He saw the way she held her head, the way her eyes, cold and regal, bore into him. He scrolled down his list. I don't see you on the list, my lady." "That is because my attendance is a matter of state security," Jen lied smoothly, flashing the signet ring on her finger. "Call Mr. Arthur Pendleton. Tell him the owner of the Coeur de Lion is here to inspect the merchandise." The bouncer hesitated. The ring looked ancient, and rich people were always eccentric. "One moment," he muttered into his earpiece. A moment later, his eyes widened. Arthur Pendleton himself, the owner of the auction house, came bustling out the front doors. He was a frantic, sweaty man. "Lady Sophia?" Arthur asked, breathless. He looked at General. He didn't recognize her. To him, the cleaning girl had never existed. He only saw a stunning woman in vintage Chanel. "Mr. Pendleton," Jen said, extending her hand, "my family has sent me. We have concerns about the provenance of Lot 45. Arthur paled. "Concerns? Please come in. We must discuss this." He ushered her past the velvet rope. Jen walked up the red carpet. She could feel the cameras flashing. She saw Victoria St. Clair standing in the foyer, holding a glass of champagne, laughing at something Liam said. Jen stepped through the doors. The air conditioning hit her skin. Victoria turned. Her smile dropped. She squinted, confused. She recognized the eyes, but her brain couldn't process the context. Jen didn't stop. She walked right past Victoria, her silk dress brushing against Victoria's legs. "Excuse me," Jen said, her voice dropping an octave, echoing the tone Victoria had used on her for years. "You're blocking the way." Victoria gasped. "Who do you think you—" Then she stopped. She stared. "Jen?" she whispered, horrified. Jen didn't look back. She walked straight towards the ballroom. The game was on. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and glittering jewels, a Shark Tank disguised as a party. A string quartet played Debussy in the corner, but the real music was the murmur of gossip. Jen moved through the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to go back to the safety of invisibility. "You're a fraud," a voice in her head whispered. "You're just the girl who empties the bins." But then she touched the signet ring on her finger. "No," she thought. "I am Sophia Genevieve, and I am tired of bowing." She spotted the Coeur de Lion immediately. It was displayed in the center of the room on a velvet pedestal encased in bulletproof glass. The diamond was the size of a walnut, glowing with a deep amber fire. But Jen wasn't looking at the stone. She was looking at the heavy, gilded frame that held the descriptive plaque below it. The ledger had been specific. The seal is behind the lion's teeth. The frame had small, ornate carvings of lions at the corners. She began to make her way towards the center, but a hand clamped onto her upper arm. The grip was painful. She was spun around to face a furious Victoria St. Clair. Victoria's face was a mask of panic and rage. Beside her, Liam looked pale, his eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. "What do you think you're doing?" Victoria hissed, her voice low and venomous. "I don't know where you stole that dress or how you tricked Arthur, but you have 5 seconds to leave before I have security throw you into the street." Jen didn't flinch. She looked at Victoria's hand on her arm, then raised her eyes to Victoria's face. "Remove your hand, Victoria. You're wrinkling the silk." Victoria blinked, stunned by the audacity. She let go as if burned. You insolent little rat! Do you have any idea who is here tonight? The Duke of Savoy, the Rothschilds. You are going to humiliate us." "I'm not here to humiliate you," Jen said calmly. "I'm here to bid." Liam let out a nervous, choked laugh. "Bid? With what, Jen? Your mop bucket? You can't even afford the coffee Victoria spilled on you." "I'm bidding with the truth," Jen said, her eyes locking onto Liam's. "Do you have the ledger, Liam? Or did you hide it already?" Liam's arrogance faltered. I destroyed it. You have nothing." "We'll see," Jen said. She turned to walk away, but Victoria stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Security!" Victoria raised her hand, snapping her fingers. 2 burly men in earpieces started moving towards them. The room quieted. People were watching. The scene was causing a ripple in the perfectly curated atmosphere. Just as the guards reached them, a booming voice echoed from the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The auction for the Coeur de Lion is about to begin." It was Arthur Pendleton at the podium. The distraction saved her. The guards hesitated, looking at the stage. "Sit down, Victoria," Jen whispered, leaning close to her ear. "Unless you want to make a scene in front of the Duke." Victoria turned purple. She knew the social code. A scene was worse than a murder. She grit her teeth, grabbed Liam's arm, and hissed, "We deal with her after. Make sure the back exit is locked. She doesn't leave this building." They swept away to their front row seats. Jen didn't sit. She stood near the back, in the shadows of a marble pillar. She watched as the wealthy elite took their places, paddling ready. "And now," Arthur announced, wiping sweat from his brow, "Lot 45, the heart of the lion, recovered from the lost vaults of the French aristocracy. Bidding starts at £20 million. 25, shouted a Russian oligarch in the front row. 30, countered a tech billionaire to the left. 40 million, came a voice from the back. It was a representative for a museum in Qatar. The numbers climbed higher and higher, dizzying amounts of money that could feed entire nations. Jen watched the diamond. It was slipping away. Once the gavel banged, legal ownership would transfer. Even if she proved her identity later, the international legal battle to get it back would take decades. She had to act. Now. £55 million, Arthur shouted. Going once, to the gentleman in the grey suit. No. Jen stepped out from the pillar. She walked straight down the centre aisle. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the parquet floor, a sound that cut through the murmurs. 70 million, Victoria shouted, raising her paddle. She was bidding on behalf of the house. She wanted to keep it in the family collection to spite everyone. 70 million to the House of Pendleton, Arthur beamed. Going once. Stop, Jen's voice rang out, clear and commanding. It wasn't a scream. It was an order. The entire room turned. 300 faces stared at her. Arthur froze, his gavel hovering in the air. I beg your pardon? Jen walked until she was at the foot of the stage. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked at the diamond. This item cannot be sold, Jen said, her voice projecting to the back of the room. It is stolen property. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Victoria stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She's lying! She's mentally unstable! Victoria pointed a shaking finger at General. Security, get this woman out of here. She's the cleaning lady. She scrubs the toilets. The room erupted in whispers. The cleaning lady? In that dress? Liam jumped up too. She's a thief. She broke into the vault last night. Arrest her. The security guards moved in, grabbing Jen by the arms. Let me go, Jen struggled, but they were too strong. They began to drag her backward. It's true, Victoria laughed, gaining confidence as she saw Jen being manhandled. Look at her hands. Look at the calluses. She's nobody. Just a dirty little nobody who thinks playing dress-up makes her a queen. Jen's heels skidded on the floor. She was losing. They were dragging her towards the doors. Wait! A cane struck the floor with a loud thwack. An elderly man in the front row stood up. He was frail, wearing a tuxedo that looked like it was from another century. He had a white beard and piercing blue eyes. It was the Duke of Savoy. Unhand her, the Duke said softly. But the room fell silent to hear him. The guards hesitated. You didn't ignore a duke. Why? Victoria shrieked, losing her composure. She's trash! The Duke looked at General. He studied her face, the high cheekbones, the shape of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. Because, the Duke said slowly, she looks exactly like her grandmother. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating. Victoria looked like she had been slapped. Her grandmother? The Duke stepped out of his row and walked toward General. The guards released her immediately, backing away. Child, the Duke whispered, his voice trembling. Who are you? Jen straightened her dress. She stood tall, composing herself. She looked at the Duke, then at the crowd, and finally at Victoria. I am not a nobody, Jen said, her voice steady, and I am not just a cleaner. She turned and walked up the stairs to the stage. Arthur Pendleton scurried out of her way, terrified. Jen stood next to this diamond. My name, she declared, is Sophia Genevieve of the House of Auvergne, and I am exercising the right of reclamation. Victoria laughed. It was a shrill, hysterical sound. You can't be serious. This is a fairy tale. You're insane. You need proof. You need the royal seal. She's right, Liam shouted from the floor. The Auvergne line is dead. There is no seal. The seal, Jen said, placing her hands on the glass case. Was never lost. She looked at Arthur. Open the case. I can't, Arthur stammered. It's sealed until the sale is complete. Open it, the Duke of Savoy roared from the floor. Do as she says. Arthur fumbled for his keys. His hands shook so badly it took him 3 tries. Finally the lock clicked. He lifted the heavy glass cube. The diamond sat there, exposed. Jen didn't touch the stone. She reached for the heavy gold frame that held the description plaque, the frame with the carved lions. She ran her fingers over the bottom right corner. She found the lion's head. She pressed her thumb against the lion's sharpest tooth. Nothing happened. The crowd began to murmur. See? Victoria shouted triumphantly. She's faking it. It's a trick. Jen closed her eyes. The ledger said the tooth. But which one? She thought back to the cipher she had decoded in her apartment. The lion bites the hand of the traitor, but releases the truth to the blood. Blood. Jen looked at the sharp gold tooth. It wasn't a button. It was a needle. She took a deep breath. She pressed her thumb hard against the gold point. It pierced her skin. A single drop of bright red blood welled up and touched the metal. Click! A mechanical whirring sound came from inside the frame. The heavy gold backing of the frame suddenly sprang open like a locket. Something fell out and clattered onto the wooden podium. It was a heavy, circular object made of solid platinum encrusted with rubies. In the center was the phoenix crest, the royal seal of Auvergne. Jen picked it up. She held it high. The stage lights caught the platinum, sending a blinding ray of light across the room. "Is this proof enough?" she asked. The Duke of Savoy gasped. He fell to his knees. "My princess," he choked out, bowing his head. And then a domino effect. The woman next to him, a countess, curtsied deep. The tech billionaire bowed. The Russian oligarch bowed. One by one, the most powerful people in Europe lowered themselves. The rustle of silk and the shuffling of feet filled the room. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was bowing, except for 2 people. Victoria St. Clair and Liam Cavendish stood frozen, the only 2 upright figures in a sea of bent backs. They looked around in horror. The power dynamic had shifted so violently it had given them whiplash. The girl they had abused, the girl whose shoes they had spilled coffee on, was now the highest-ranking person in the room. Jen looked down at them from the stage. She held the seal in one hand, her bleeding thumb in the other. "Victoria," Jen said softly. The microphone picked it up, amplifying it to every corner of the room. Victoria flinched. "You missed a spot," Jen said. She pointed to the floor. "Kneel." The silence in the Pendleton ballroom was absolute. A heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered the usual clinking of champagne flutes and polite laughter. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes an execution. 300 of Europe's wealthiest, most powerful individuals were on their knees. The rustle of expensive silk and the creaking of stiff tuxedo knees had ceased, leaving a tableau that looked less like a gala and more like a medieval court paying homage. In the center of this sea of bowed heads, only 2 figures remained standing, jutting out like jagged rocks in a calm ocean. Victoria St. Clair and Liam Cavendish. Victoria stood frozen near the front row. Her face, usually a mask of bored, aristocratic detachment, was contorted into an expression of sheer, uncomprehending horror. Her brain was misfiring. The social hierarchy she had worshipped since birth, the rigid ladder where she sat at the top and people like Genevieve sat in the mud, had just inverted itself in the span of 30 seconds. Genevieve stood on the stage, looking down at them. In her right hand, the heavy platinum seal of Auvergne caught the stage lights, casting a fractured, blinding reflection across the room. In her left hand, her thumb still bled a single crimson bead, the blood price of her identity. "Victoria," Jen said again, her voice soft but amplified by the microphone, so that it boomed like thunder in the corners of the room. "I believe I gave you an instruction." Victoria's chest heaved. The humiliation was a physical thing, clawing at her throat. She looked around, desperate for an ally. She looked at the Countess of Varley, usually her staunchest supporter. The Countess was face down, her forehead touching the parquet floor. She looked at the tech billionaire who had been buying her drinks earlier. He was staring studiously at his shoes, refusing to meet her gaze. They had abandoned her. The moment the seal appeared, the sharks had smelled blood in the water, and they knew exactly who the prey was. "No," Victoria whispered, her voice shaking. Then louder, screaming it. "No!" She took a step forward, her heels clacking violently on the floor. "This is a trick. It's a parlour trick." She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at the Duke of Savoy. "You senile old fool. You're in on it. You hired her, didn't you? This is some sick performance art to embarrass my father." The Duke slowly straightened his back, rising from his bow. He didn't look frail anymore. He looked like a monument to a bygone era of iron and stone. He tapped his cane once on the ground, a sharp, final sound. "Miss St. Clair," the Duke said, his voice rumbling with a quiet menace that terrified the room more than any shout could. "I suggest you lower your voice. You are speaking to the rightful sovereign of the House of Auvergne. In another century, you would have been beheaded for less." "She's a maid!" Victoria shrieked, her composure shattering completely. Spittle flew from her lips. "She scrubs the toilets. She smells like bleach and poverty. Look at her hands. Look at her dirty, calloused hands." Victoria lunged. Logic had left her. She was driven purely by animalistic rage. She rushed towards the stairs of the stage, her nails hooked like talons, intent on tearing the dress off Jen's body, intent on erasing the image of the cleaning girl looking down on her. "I'll kill you!" Victoria screamed. "I'll ruin you! You dirty little rat!" She never reached the first step. The security team, previously paralyzed by confusion, finally snapped into action. But they didn't move to protect Victoria. They moved to protect the woman holding the seal. 2 large guards intercepted Victoria, grabbing her by the arms. The momentum of her run jerked her back violently as they anchored her. "Get off me!" she wailed, thrashing like a wild animal. "Do you know who my father is? He owns this building. He pays your salaries. I'll have you all fired. I'll have you on the street." Genevieve watched the struggle from the stage with an eerie calmness. She didn't flinch. She simply raised the microphone to her lips again. "Actually," Jen said, her voice cutting through Victoria's screams like a scalpel, "he doesn't." Victoria stopped thrashing for a split second, panting. "What?" Jen turned slightly to look at Arthur Pendleton, who was standing to the side of the stage, looking as though he might faint. He was wiping sweat from his bald head with a handkerchief, his eyes darting between Jen and the guards. "Mr. Pendleton," Jen said, her tone conversational, almost pleasant. "You are the custodian of the House Archives. You are familiar with the original charter of the auction house, established in 1892 by my great-grandfather, Duke Henri of Auvergne." Arthur swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He stepped into the light, his voice squeaking. Yes, Your Highness, I am familiar with it. And isn't there a clause," Jen continued, locking eyes with Victoria, "Section 4, Paragraph 2, regarding the ownership of the land on Bond Street?" Arthur nodded vigorously. The permanent lien clause." "Yes." "Would you mind explaining it to the room?" Jen asked. Arthur cleared his throat, addressing the crowd. The land was never sold to the Pendleton family. It was a 99-year lease granted by the House of Auvergne. The lease includes a moral turpitude clause. If the tenant, or their associates, act in a way that brings dishonor or malice upon the House of Auvergne, the lease is immediately voided and the property reverts to the Crown. A gasp rippled through the room. The legal implications were instantaneous and catastrophic. Jen stepped to the edge of the stage. She looked down at Victoria, who was now pale, her mouth hanging open. "Your father doesn't own this building, Victoria," Jen said coldly. "I do." She swept her arm across the room, encompassing the marble pillars, the crystal chandeliers, the velvet drapes. "I own the walls. I own the floor you are standing on. And I am revoking your invitation." Jen looked at the guards holding Victoria, Her eyes hardened. "Remove this trespasser from my property, immediately." "You can't do this!" Victoria screamed, the fight returning to her as the guards began to drag her backward. Her heels skidded uselessly on the polished floor. "Daddy! Call my father! Liam, do something!" She looked frantically for Liam Cavendish. Liam was trying to make himself invisible. He had backed away towards the service exit, clutching his leather briefcase to his chest, sweat pouring down his face. He looked like a rat looking for a sewer grate. "And him," Jen said, pointing a finger at Liam. "Stop him." 2 more guards broke off and sprinted towards the side door. Liam saw them coming and tried to bolt, but he tripped over a tripod leg of a camera crew. He went down hard, the briefcase flying from his hands and skidding across the floor. It spun to a stop at the feet of the Duke of Savoy. The guards hauled Liam up by his collar. "Get off me! I didn't do anything!" Liam cried, his voice high and pathetic. "Check the bag," Jen commanded from the stage. The Duke of Savoy reached down. With the tip of his cane, he flipped the latch of the briefcase. The lid popped open. Inside, nestled among frantic notes and a passport, was a thick, leather-bound book. The cover was worn, the gold leaf fading, but the title was unmistakable. The Red Ledger. The Duke picked it up. He held it aloft for the room to see. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Duke announced, his voice grave, "this is the private financial registry of the House of Auvergne, stolen from the biometric vault in the basement." He turned his gaze to Liam. "Possession of this book is not just theft. It contains state secrets. This is treason." The colour drained from Liam's face entirely. He looked at the guards, then at the crowd, and finally his eyes landed on Victoria, who was still being restrained a few feet away. Self-preservation kicked in. The rat turned on its master. "It was her!" Liam shouted, pointing a shaking hand at Victoria. "She told me to hide it. She knew. She knew who Jen was days ago. She saw the name in the employee file and told me to destroy the evidence. You liar!" "Oh!" Victoria screeched, thrashing again. "You incompetent worm! You're lying!" She said if I didn't help her, she'd ruin my career. Liam sobbed, tears streaming down his face. She wanted the diamond sold so Jen couldn't prove her claim. It was all her idea. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the 2 conspirators tore each other apart. It was ugly, raw, and undeniably satisfying. The mask of civility had dropped, revealing the rot underneath. "That is quite enough," Jen said. She sounded tired now. "Take them away. Call the police." The guards didn't hesitate. They dragged the screaming Victoria and the sobbing Liam out through the heavy double doors. Victoria's final wail echoed in the corridor, long after the doors slammed shut. "Do you know who I am?" Then silence returned. But it was different now. It wasn't fearful. It was reverent. Slowly, tentatively, the crowd began to rise from their knees. They looked at Jen with new eyes. They weren't seeing the girl in the torn vintage dress anymore. They were seeing a force of nature. A slow clap started from the back. It was the Russian oligarch. Then the tech billionaire joined in. Then the Countess. Within seconds, the room erupted into a thunderous ovation. It was a wall of sound, a frantic attempt by the elite to align themselves with the victor. Jen stood on the stage, watching them. She felt no triumph in their applause. She knew these people. They would have applauded her execution if the wind had blown the other way. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Arthur Pendleton was standing there, looking humble. "Your Highness," he whispered, gesturing to the pedestal. "The auction is cancelled, obviously, but the diamond remains. What are your orders? Shall we return it to the vault? Or perhaps arrange an armoured transport to your estate?" Jen turned to look at the Coeur de Lion. The diamond sat under the harsh lights, glowing with that deep, amber fire. It was magnificent. It was worth £70 million. It was the price of a small country. But when Jen looked at it, she didn't see wealth. She saw the brake lines cut on her parents' car. She saw the years of eating instant noodles in a cold apartment. She saw the way Victoria looked at her when she spilled the coffee. The diamond was a cursed thing. It fed on greed. Jen walked over to the pedestal. She picked up the stone. It was heavy, cold, and hard. She walked back to the microphone. The applause died down instantly. Everyone waited to hear what the new queen would do with her treasure. "This stone," Jen said, her voice echoing through the hall, "has been the cause of envy, theft, and murder for 300 years. It has destroyed my family. It has poisoned this house." She paused, looking into the lens of the nearest camera. "I am not keeping it," she declared. A collective gasp of shock went through the room. "I am donating the Coeur de Lion to the British Museum," Jen announced, "effective tomorrow morning." The room buzzed with confusion. Giving away a fortune? It was unthinkable to them. "But on one condition," Jen added, her voice steel. "The exhibit must be free. No tickets, no VIP access. Anyone can walk in off the street and see it. And the plaque will not bear the name of the House of Oberon, nor the House of Pendleton." She looked out at the faces of the billionaires and aristocrats. "It will be dedicated to the nobodies," she said, "to the invisible people, to the cleaners, the servers, the drivers, the assistants, to the people who built your world while you were too busy looking in the mirror." She placed the diamond gently back on the velvet cushion. Then she did something that would be talked about in London society for decades. She reached down and unbuckled her high heels, the cheap, scuffed shoes she had bought from a charity shop. She kicked them off, letting them clatter onto the stage. She stood barefoot on the polished wood. She felt the vibrations of the room through the soles of her feet. She felt grounded. Real. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Jen said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that night. "I believe I missed a spot in the hallway, and I always finish the job." She grabbed the heavy platinum seal in one hand and her shoes in the other. Barefoot, head held high, Princess Sophia Genevieve walked down the stairs of the stage. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea, creating a wide avenue of respect. As she walked past them, not a single person dared to speak. They simply watched the girl they had called a nobody walk out the front door and into the history books. The rain on Bond Street didn't feel cold anymore. To Genevieve, it felt like a baptism. As she stepped out of the Pendleton auction house, the heavy oak doors thudding shut behind her, the silence of the shock inside was replaced by the chaotic roar of the outside world. The paparazzi, tipped off by the commotion and the live streams from guests' phones, had swarmed. "Genevieve, is it true? Your Highness, look here! Did you really fire the St. Clair heiress?" Jen shielded her eyes against the strobing flashbulbs. She was barefoot, holding her cheap, scuffed heels in one hand and the heavy platinum seal of Auvergne in the other. It was a surreal image, a queen in a torn vintage dress standing on the wet pavement, utterly alone. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the curb, parting the sea of photographers. The rear window rolled down, revealing the Duke of Savoy. "Get in, child," he said, his voice grave. "The wolves are gathering. You cannot stay here." Jen didn't hesitate. She slid into the leather interior, the warmth of the car enveloping her. As the car pulled away, leaving the screaming press behind, Jen finally let out the breath she had been holding for 3 hours. She slumped back against the seat, the adrenaline crash hitting her like a physical blow. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "To a fortress," the Duke replied, "because the war, my dear Sophia, has only just begun." The countermove. The next morning the headlines were vicious. The influence of Lord Alastair St. Clair, Victoria's father, was immediate and toxic. The maid who would be queen. Mental health crisis at Pendleton Gala. Cleaning lady steals prop, claims royalty. Pendleton heiress assaulted by deranged staff. They were spinning it. They were trying to bury the truth under an avalanche of lies before Jen could get a foothold. Jen sat in the library of the Savoy estate in the countryside, reading the papers on an iPad. She wore a borrowed cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back. She looked like a student, not a threat. But her eyes were hard. "He controls the narrative," Jen said, tossing the tablet onto the mahogany table. "He owns 2 of these newspapers." The Duke sat across from her, pouring tea. "He is scared, Sophia. Alistair St. Clair is a man who has built an empire on the bones of others. He knows that if your identity is ratified, his ownership of the Pendleton assets and the Auvergne trust funds he quietly absorbed in 2002 will be audited." Jen froze. "He absorbed the funds?" "The coup of the Black Rose," the Duke said, setting down his cup. "It wasn't a political uprising, Sophia. That is the lie history books told. The Black Rose was a private equity syndicate. They destabilized the House of Auvergne financially to seize the assets. The man who led that syndicate was Alistair St. Clair." The room spun. Jen gripped the arm of her chair. "You mean—" "My parents didn't die in an accident." The Duke looked down, his expression full of sorrow. The brakes on their car were tampered with. The police report was buried. The coroner was paid off. St. Clair didn't just want the money. He wanted the lineage erased, so there would be no one to challenge his acquisition of the Auvergne billions. Jen stood up. She walked to the window, looking out at the grey English garden. She had thought this was about a diamond. She had thought this was about humiliation and getting even with a bully like Victoria. But it was murder. Victoria wasn't just a mean girl. She was the beneficiary of blood money. Her designer clothes, her education, her job at the auction house. It was all paid for with the lives of Jen's parents. Jen turned back to the Duke. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, calculated fury. "I don't want to just sue him," Jen said softly. "I want to destroy him." The trap 3 days later, an invitation was sent to Lord Alistair St. Clair. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was from the production team of the Morning Chronicles, the most watched live interview program in the UK. Jen had agreed to an exclusive interview, but she had leaked a rumour to St. Clair's camp. She is ready to settle. She wants a payout to disappear. Lord St. Clair, arrogant and believing he had won the PR war, agreed to appear on the show alongside her, to accept her apology and discuss her mental health treatment. The studio was freezing. The lights were blinding. Jen sat in a beige chair, wearing a simple white blouse and black trousers. She looked small, fragile. Lord Alistair St. Clair sat opposite her. He was a lion of a man. Silver hair, bespoke suit, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Victoria sat in the audience, looking vindicated, smugly texting on her phone. The host, a sharp woman named Eleanor, began, "Genevieve, it's been a whirlwind week. Lord St. Clair has been generous enough to offer not to press charges for the disturbance at the gala, provided you seek help. What do you have to say?" Jen looked at the camera. Then she looked at Lord St. Clair. "I'd like to thank Lord St. Clair," Jen said, her voice trembling slightly, "for keeping my family's money safe for so long." St. Clair chuckled, a patronizing sound. "My dear, we've discussed this. There is no money. It's a fantasy." "Is it?" Jen reached under her chair and pulled out the red ledger. St. Clair's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "That's Stole. That book is irrelevant. This book," Jen said, opening it, "is the ledger Liam Cavendish tried to hide. But I didn't just bring the ledger, Alistair. I brought the decryption key." She held up a USB drive. "You see," Jen continued, her voice strengthening, dropping the act of the fragile girl. "While I was cleaning your floors, I was also listening. But more importantly, I was studying. You thought the Auvergne accounts were closed, but my father, anticipating the Black Rose coup, set up a fail-safe." Jen turned to the giant screen behind them. "Can we play the clip, please?" The screen flickered. It wasn't a clip of her parents. It was a grainy security video from the Pendleton vault dated 4 days ago. It showed Liam Cavendish holding the ledger, but the audio had been enhanced, Liam's voice on tape, Does Victoria know? Jen's voice. No. Liam, you're the lost heir. I'll figure out how to sell this information. Alistair will pay millions to keep this buried, just like he paid to cut the brake lines in '98. The studio audience gasped. Lord St. Clair stood up, his face draining of colour. This is a fabrication, a deep fake. Cut the feed. It's not a fake, Jen said calmly, because Liam didn't know the Vault Records audio. But I did. I cleaned the microphones every Tuesday. Jen looked directly at Alistair. You murdered them. You killed the Duke and Duchess of Auvergne for a portfolio of stocks. And you let their daughter scrub your floors while you spent her inheritance. Shut it off, St. Clair screamed, lunging toward the host. But the police were already moving in. They emerged from the wings of the stage, 4 officers from Scotland Yard. Lord Alistair St. Clair, the lead officer said, stepping onto the set. We have a warrant for your arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, and grand larceny. Victoria screamed from the audience. She tried to run, but 2 officers blocked her path. And you, Miss St. Clair, the officer said, for being an accessory to the theft of the ledger and obstruction of justice. The live broadcast didn't cut. The entire nation watched as the Titan of Mayfair was handcuffed on live television. They watched Victoria St. Clair, the girl who had treated people like furniture, being dragged away in tears, her mascara running down her face, screaming, "Do you know who I am?" Jen remained seated. She looked into the camera lens, her expression unreadable. Yes, Jen whispered to the millions watching. We know exactly who you are. Turned the quiet after the storm. 6 months later, the Pendleton auction house was under new management. The sign out front had been changed. It now read, * the Sterling Foundation, Museum of Cultural History. Genevieve stood in the main gallery. It was free to enter. School children were running around, looking at the exhibits. The Coeur de Lion diamond was there, in the centre. But it wasn't the star anymore. The star was the story, the history of the nobodies, the working class of London throughout the centuries. Jen walked to the back office. She didn't wear a crown. She wore a blazer and jeans. She was finishing her PhD. There was a knock on the door. It was Liam Cavendish. He looked terrible. He was out on bail, awaiting sentencing. He had turned state's witness against Alistair to reduce his jail time, but his career was over. He was working at a car wash in East London. "What do you want, Liam?" Jen asked, not looking up from her paperwork. Liam twisted his cap in his hands. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. For the coffee. For everything." Jen put down her pen. She looked at him. She didn't feel anger anymore. She just felt pity. "You're not sorry you did it, Liam," she said. "You're sorry the guy you bet on lost." "I have nothing," Liam said, his voice cracking. "No friends, no job. Victoria blames me for everything." "You have your freedom," Jen said, "which is more than my parents have. Now please leave. I have a floor to inspect." Liam nodded, shamed, and backed out of the room. Jen stood up and walked out to the balcony overlooking the main hall. The Duke of Savoy was there, leaning on his cane, watching the children marvel at the diamond. "You could have been a queen, you know," the Duke said, smiling at her. "With the assets recovered, you could have bought an island. You could have lived in a palace." "I have a palace," Jen said, looking around the museum filled with laughter and life. "And this one doesn't have any gates." She looked down at her hands. They were still the hands of a worker, strong, capable. She wasn't Princess Sophia Genevieve of Auvergne anymore. That title belonged to a ghost. She was general, and for the first time in her life, being herself was enough. She looked at the brass railing of the staircase. It was smudged with fingerprints from the school kids. She smiled, pulled a polishing cloth from her pocket, and wiped it clean. Old habits die hard. But this time, she wasn't cleaning for them. She was cleaning for herself. The story of Genevieve Sterling is a stark reminder that the way we treat people when we think they have no power is the truest measure of our character. Victoria St. Clair and her father believed that titles and money made them untouchable, but they forgot the most dangerous force in the world, a person with nothing to lose and the truth on their side. If this story gave you chills, or if you've ever felt overlooked and underestimated, hit that like button right now. Let's show the world that nobodies are powerful. What would you have done if you found that ledger? Would you have taken the money and ran, or would you have stayed to fight like Jen? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I have another story coming next week about a homeless man who accidentally bought a bank. You do not want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you step on. They might just be wearing a crown.